Hello, everybody. Welcome along to this session. I'm Gareth. I'm your friendly host today, and I present a program called Digital Planet on the BBC World Service. We talk about technology every week, and I do other bits and pieces of podcasting and stuff. But that's all you need to know about me, because we have an amazing panel today to talk about AI and medicine. And as we all know, everyone's talking about artificial intelligence these days, and it has huge potential in medicine and drug discovery. But that also means there's quite a lot of hype. So one thing we're going to do today is try and unpick the hype from the reality. Now, of course, we're also talking about people and people's data and medical discovery. So that inevitably brings with it a big ethical dimension. We're going to get into that. And then also, what about the future? It's an exciting field. So what are we going to see in the years ahead? So lots to get into. So let's meet our guests today, starting with Jim Weatherall, who's VP Data Science and AI in R&D at AstraZeneca. And Jim, what most excites you about artificial intelligence?
Hi, Gareth. Great to be here. I think AI is so exciting because it has the potential to benefit our lives everywhere. It's really hard to think of an area of our lives, of our business, of our leisure pursuits, of our healthcare environment that can't be improved by AI. And I'm looking forward to discussing all that further today.
Okay, Jim, that's great. And appropriately for the Cambridge Festival, we have a lot of Cambridge-based people here today, including Mihaela Vandershaw, who's director of the Cambridge Centre for AI in Medicine. So what about you, Mihaela? What most excites you about AI?
First, thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm incredibly excited about AI because this is a wonderfully creative area. And with AI, we can imagine and build new and better worlds. And I'm especially excited about AI and its potential to transform healthcare and education, two areas that I'm very passionate about.
All right. Now, we also have Anne Phelan, who's Chief Scientific Officer with Benevolent AI. So we're going to find out more as we go along, Anne, about what benevolent AI is. But what excites you about this field?
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. Really pleased to be here. I think for me, the most exciting element of AI is in drug discovery because it's a really, really difficult challenge. Finding the right drugs for the right patients is a really difficult challenge. And applying AI and machine learning to these questions, allowing us to find the right targets, find the right drugs, find the right patients, conduct the right clinical trial, is just going to revolutionize, I think, the way we approach drug discovery and particularly the probability of success of making drugs that really work for patients.
Thank you. And also here is Junaid Bajwa, who's Chief Medical Scientist at Microsoft Research. So predictable opening question for you then, Junaid. What gets you fired up about AI?
Thanks, Gareth, and delighted to be here as well. Difficult to follow what everybody else has said, but maybe from a specific clinical and healthcare perspective, I think AI has the potential to augment the superpowers that clinicians, healthcare professionals already have, and enable a future for precision medicine in a way that we haven't really imagined before.
And I want to find out, before we jump in fully, about what each of you do in your organisations. So let's stay with you, Junaid. So you're with Microsoft Research. Now, I tend to associate Microsoft with Windows and Xbox. I hadn't thought of it as being a medical research organisation necessarily. So how does that come in?
You're right. And Microsoft do a lot of things. So Microsoft's pure mission is how can you empower everybody on the planet to do more with technology? And if you apply that to healthcare, what we're exploring is what is the role that technology can play to empower everybody to have better health. The lab that I work in focuses on really thinking about how can you leverage human-centered artificial intelligence to transform the practice of medicine. We have 8 labs across the world doing different things, and we're in hospitals, we're working with payers, we're working with pharma companies day in, day out, really thinking about the role that technology and AI can play to both democratize healthcare, create equity in healthcare, and ensure that patients are living healthier, longer lives.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be one theme that comes out of today, which is that of collaboration across different sectors, across different companies, public, private, and so on. So Jim Weatherall, let's come back to you at AstraZeneca, because I would have said that Microsoft is a technology company, you're a pharmaceutical company, and yet you meet in the middle, really, don't you, in medical research. So AI and data science are baked right into AstraZeneca's mission strategy, aren't they?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's so many areas, as some of the other panelists have already articulated, where these kind of techniques can accelerate the way we develop medicine. It can help us pick the right medicines for the right patients, so that we sort of streamline the whole process really, and help people live better lives by getting the right medicines to the right patients more quickly. And I guess we're going to come on to some examples later, but I'm very privileged to be working in an R&D environment that has taken data and AI as kind of one of its core drivers of future strategy. And yeah, I have the role to find as many impact points as possible where AI can improve the way we develop medicines for the world.
All right. And Mihaela, what about you then? So you're at the Cambridge Centre for AI in Medicine. So tell me a bit about that centre and what goes on.
So the Cambridge Center for AI in Medicine, which had the inauguration just a few months back, aims to develop pioneering artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies to transform biomedical science, medicine, and healthcare. And it brings professors and researchers and students throughout the university. And the unique sweet spot of the center is the fact that we bring together machine learning, bioscience, and medicine together into a truly interdisciplinary environment. And what's unique about us is that we believe that on one hand, medicine and healthcare drive innovation in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And conversely, the machine learning and artificial intelligence technologies are driving a revolution in healthcare. And we are working closely with industry partners to transfer these technologies that we are developing into real products and real practice. And the main focus is on 4 key areas: biomedical discovery using artificial intelligence, developing omics analytics using machine learning, delivering precision medicine using machine learning, and enabling next generation clinical trials. So we are very excited to be working on all these topics.
All right. So Anne, I'm fascinated by benevolent AI. So I know you're a platform, as I understand it, it's a technology platform for furthering drug discovery. And guess what? AI is right at the heart of it. It's in the name of your organization. So tell me more about what you do.
Yeah, thanks. So Benevolent AI are a AI machine learning augmented drug discovery company. So we've spent the last 6 years integrating all the world's biomedical literature, so patents, peer-reviewed journal publications, health records, omics data, and building a fantastically rich knowledge graph. So it's a kind of interconnected picture of human disease and human biology with all of the interconnected proteins, the relationships between genes and proteins and intracellular processes, so that we can start to get a picture of what human biology really looks like, and what, when it's dysregulated, what disease actually looks like. And we can, using the AI machine learning tools and the scientists that we have at Benevolent, we're able to query the knowledge graph and ask questions of it. What would be the best treatment for this disease? And the tools are able to generate hypotheses. Now, clearly, we experimentally test these hypotheses. We've got labs here in Cambridge, where I am today, and we're able to test those hypotheses. And then when we get positive results, we're able to take them into a drug discovery portfolio. So we have our own labs, our own drug discovery pipeline. So it's everything from understanding the huge and mind-bogglingly complex network of human biology, all the way through to distilling that down to individual projects that will ultimately yield drugs that will go into clinical development.
Wow. So you're going right down to the fundamentals then. So as I understand it, humans are made up of cells, and we have all kinds of molecules in those cells. You develop a new drug, which is a molecule that needs to interact with those cells in some way. And what you do, and the other people here in this session, but at Benevolent AI, you're really getting right down to that fundamental level of understanding the drug molecule, understanding right down to the minutiae, the human biology, and seeing how they interact.
Yeah, exactly right. So within a cell itself is a complicated feature. It's thousands and thousands of proteins, thousands of regulated molecules, all interacting with each other. Cells become tissues, tissues become organs, organs become people. And so it's unbelievably vast amounts of data that go into understanding human biology on an individual basis. And then thinking about the variability between people, everybody's different, everybody responds differently to environmental factors, to drug treatments, and to try and think about biology as a whole, but also at an individual level, so that we can start to think about precision medicine and tailoring drugs that will work particularly well for certain individuals, is a task that normal humans are just not able to assimilate data on that scale. But machine learning algorithms and AI tools thrive on this vast volume of data. So it is actually probably the only way that we can start to build pictures of human biology in anything like a realistic framework, taking advantage of the power of these machines.
Right. So, Junaid, we're talking about mind-boggling complexity here. The human body in itself is a remarkable and incredibly complex thing. And then you start talking about bringing in molecules and new drug candidates, and you're talking about, I'm guessing, billions, maybe orders of magnitude more than that, of interactions that needs to be poured through, patterns to be elucidated from those interactions. That means crazy amounts of computing kind of power, but also the artificial intelligence. And I think what I want to get into here is maybe to provocatively ask you if artificial intelligence is a slightly misleading term. I wonder, what is intelligent? In other words, are the machines really looking at an interaction and thinking like a doctor does and saying, oh, look, this is happening? Or really, are we just talking about very elaborate, very impressive algorithms, but they're pattern matching at the end of the day? This is glorified statistics, isn't it? Is it really intelligent?
No, it's a great and provocative question. So perhaps we should probably take a step back and say, for artificial intelligence to maximize its potential, what needs to be true? And I think compute power is one thing, data access is another, and the third thing is domain expertise, so that you set the rules by which models can be trained on. If we take a further step back and say, what is artificial intelligence? Perhaps we could think about a definition that we would agree to around the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. And that intelligence is driven by applications that allow computer programs to learn through their experiences. But those experiences still need to set some guardrails today. And as the more we get into this space, the more new science is being created. So you can have both supervised and unsupervised versions of this. But as this goes on, we can then imagine what these other applications of this new technology could be. And so I'm a medic as well, and I think a lot of what I learned at medical school and then throughout most of my training and as I continue to practice is pattern recognition. It's understanding from the history I take and the conversations I have with patients, what could be the issue that is troubling them the most. How can I move away from not just thinking about what's the matter with this individual from that diagnostic, but what matters to them, and begin to also understand their social determinants of health. But I, in my brain, start to link in the story that they're telling me with the data that's in front of me, with the investigations that are coming from their blood tests, their imaging analysis, to ultimately then provide a diagnosis. Imagine if I could do that faster, better, more efficiently, if I could have the world's class research at my fingertips and it wouldn't take 10 to 15 years for that research to benefit that patient. Ultimately, this artificial intelligence is augmenting my intelligence to deliver better care.
I know, I think that's such an important point, isn't it? So I don't think at any point in this conversation today we're going to be talking about the AIs taking over from the doctors and the experts and the scientists, not anytime soon anyway. It's about augmenting existing superpowers amongst the medics, the scientists, and so on. But I do wonder then, as we think about this, I'm thinking, like, you're a doctor, so you'll know about medical training. And one way that I understand it is that presumably a trainee doctor during their education will look, for instance, at hundreds or thousands of medical scans of certain tumours or anatomy or what have you. And if you show the student enough of these images, they learn, they get better at recognising them in the clinic. Can we sort of extrapolate from that and say that what we're seeing with machine learning is that you can fire all these images into a machine learning algorithm and it can just make all these patterns amongst them. It can elucidate from that data diagnoses and so on. And just because machines have higher bandwidth than humans, it just means you can throw as many images at a machine learning algorithm in a minute as maybe a medical student would see during the entirety of their degree.
So I'd agree with some of that. And I think we're on a journey to fulfill the ambition for other elements of what you've said. So I think the ability to have lots of images being reviewed at the same time, yes, there is pattern recognition that could take place. And what it could probably spot is, based on the models that I've seen, does this look appropriate or inappropriate? And the things that look inappropriate, it needs to then have a mechanism by which that can then be viewed by a specialist or a domain expert to then say, well, actually, there's an issue over here. And so if we're thinking about screening programs, imagine how many screening programs take place and how many normal results there are versus abnormal. And in medicine, we should never be making mistakes. We should never be making mistakes, because that mistake then impacts on a patient's life. Could we just get more accurate as a consequence of partnering with these machine intelligent tools to allow us to deliver safer, better care?
Okay, that's great. So Jim, let's I suppose continue this discussion, especially when it comes to medical imaging. We're going to talk about lots of different uses of AI and data science, but obviously medical imaging is a big thing, is a big part of it, and going through lots of medical images, diagnosing tumours, whatever it might be. And when a machine is analysing, say, a whole raft of medical images, it's not as if it's noticing, it's not conscious of noticing that there's some kind of abnormality in one of the images. It's still ones and zeros at the end of the day. It's still patterns of data. And I guess what the machine learning algorithm was able to do is to map all this data and then spot anomalies. But really all it's seeing is just ones and zeros. It's not thinking, oh, look, Mr. or Mrs. Smith has a tumour here.
Yeah, I mean, this is really fascinating, right? And perhaps we have to be careful we don't drift off too much into philosophical wonderings about, whether machines can be truly conscious. But I mean, that's an interesting discussion maybe for another time. What really is consciousness, and can anybody one day invent an AI that's so sophisticated that it essentially attains a human-like consciousness? I think that's probably some time off. You're quite right. What we're concerned with today is, can we bring these, to build on what some of the other panelists said, these capabilities of scale, accuracy, pattern recognition, anomaly detection, and do that with huge throughput, huge accuracy, cheaper, faster, better, essentially, more with a greater scientific quality, so that then if I think about what we're trying to do, developing new medicines in AstraZeneca, so that our scientists can now be better empowered to sort of use their knowledge to make decisions, and they're not getting eye strain looking down a digital microscope all day, every day. That's what I think is at stake right now. And consciousness for machines is a fascinating topic, but probably one for another day.
Yeah, I totally agree. Maybe when we've had a drink or two, something like that, we can get into those deep questions. But I suppose for the purposes of this panel, just helping our audience understand that in some cases, these machines are, they are matching patterns. They're not consciously thinking about tumours or whatever it is. But what's really remarkable about this is how these algorithms are moving forward in that anomaly detection, as you say. Now, to me, the other remarkable thing, and we'll come on to the other panelists and Mahalia in a minute as well, to discuss this, is, for instance, in drug discovery, and for instance, synthesizing, Jim, molecules. So you work with these things called neural networks, which I suppose are based on the architecture of the human brain. You'll explain it better than me. But in terms of discovering new molecules, new drug candidates, that sounds so exciting. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so quite right. Neural networks are a type of AI algorithm that's really inspired by the structure of the human brain. So just to get our terminology right for a second, technically, a neural network is the way your brain works. When we implement that on a computer, it's called an artificial neural network. It's just that sometimes people drop the word artificial and they use neural network to refer to either. But I think what's really exciting is, although neural networks have now been around as a sort of computing technique for a few decades, they've really come on leaps and bounds in the last few years due to new breakthroughs, new ways of removing performance limitations, much greater expanded volumes of data and computing power. And so we use these neural networks as a sort of a learning space to develop these molecular structures. So you think a lot of the development of a new medicine starts off with understanding how to synthesize and put together a collection of atoms and molecules into some kind of structure, which will ultimately go into a pill or an injection or whatever the drug is going to be, which targets that disease and cures or improves the condition of the patient. And we found that these neural networks can kind of learn the structure. Again, it's pattern recognition, but it's very smart. It's kind of looking at the end game. So what our neural networks do is they say, well, we want a molecular structure that's something we can actually build. It's got to be something we can make in the lab, otherwise we can't make it into a medicine. It's got to be stable. It's got to have the right properties in the human body, so it's got to be processed in the right way. And using those things as an objective, just as a computer playing chess would have certain objectives and certain scores it's trying to maximize when it's playing chess or Go or something like that, we try to maximize scores around the capacity of this molecule to attack this particular disease. So it's very exciting. We've been using neural networks for some time now to design our molecules inside our drugs.
So you can optimize for certain outcomes, and that to me is where it gets very, very exciting, because as you know, we could have a long discussion about consciousness, but what is going on here is what it is, machine learning by definition, isn't it? So it's learning new patterns as it goes along. It's developing. It's not like just a hardwired system that will just give you the same output every single time. In fact, I wonder, Jim, can we understand it in terms of the machine learning that we come into contact with in our everyday lives? I'm thinking about these recommendation engines on my online retail site that I go to that seems to learn as it goes along what kind of books I read, what kind of music I listen to. Is it a bit like that, but on the slightly more grand level of drug discovery for you?
I mean, it's similar in a sense, right? And it's actually interesting just how much machine learning is out there that people perhaps might not be aware of. I mean, you just gave one example. I mean, you could think of, we don't fly very much these days, but autopilot systems in planes, navigation systems in map applications. When you upload a photo to social media and it recognizes faces and people and things like that. Virtual voice assistants, all those things tend to have machine learning behind them these days. And what we've done is taken machine learning into one other domain, which is chemistry and chemical synthesis, and we've applied it there. So, you know, as Junaid said, it's all about the domain knowledge. Can we take these techniques and apply them in new areas to get new breakthroughs?
All right. So, Mihaela, let's pick that up with you then at the Cambridge Centre for AI in Medicine. And we've heard a lot there about anomaly detection in medical images. We were getting into that whole idea of neural network and drug discovery. So, how are you moving the field on over where you are in the centre?
So we are focusing actually on four main areas where artificial intelligence and machine learning can make a difference. And this goes way beyond just imaging and images. I know that a lot of work has been done in publicizing the breakthroughs that we have made on the basis of imaging, but a lot more is possible right now, going way beyond that. So first is the area of personalized medicine. Currently, when somebody is going to the doctor, there may be a set of risk scores that are computed for that particular individual. In the future, with the help of machine learning, we can compute a large variety of risk scores for a patient, a healthy patient, and what would happen to them in the short run and in the long run, such that we can have a complete view of the patient health and how this may evolve over time, such that we can have preventive care as well. Also, currently, when we are monitoring patients or screening patients, we are often doing that in a one-size-fits-all fashion. There are, for instance, screening programs for breast cancer at a particular age or for other types of cancer. In the future, on the basis of the variety of information we have about the patients, both genetic information, but other lifestyle factors, family history, we will increasingly move to personalized screening and monitoring with the help of artificial intelligence, which will enable us to detect disease early. And conversely, it will enable us not to harm the patient through unnecessary screening and monitoring. Also, if somebody has been diagnosed with a particular disease, we are going to be able to integrate the wealth of information available about this patient so far and project into the future, issue forecasts about disease and disease trajectories such that we can better monitor and treat the particular patient. And finally, as was discussed a couple of times today, we have the opportunity to use machine learning and AI to identify what treatments are best for a particular patient and when should this patient be given this particular treatment or combination of treatments. Then in another area that I think machine learning can make a big contribution to healthcare is that of empowering healthcare professionals. You talked about having recommender systems that tell us, for instance, what movie to see or what shoes to buy. In a similar way, I believe that in the future we will have personalized machine learning assistants to support both clinicians as well as patients. So depending on the specialty of the clinician, the personalized machine learning enabled assistant will be able to help assist them with the right information and assist them with the right decisions. And conversely, the patients are going to be enabled as well, because we are going to have support systems enabled by machine learning to enable us to better deal with whatever illness we may deal with at a particular moment in time. And in that regard, a lot of work is happening in the center of making machine learning more interpretable, more explainable, more trustworthy, such that clinicians and patients can really integrate it in their decision-making process. And you talk about consciousness in machines. We are not there yet, but we are starting to go towards that goal. We are increasingly using machine learning to understand the clinical decision making, to understand humans, to understand potentially how they integrate information and information over time, and understand variation in practice. And some of the variation in practice is desired because the patients are different, but some other variation in practice is due to the fact that maybe different clinicians may have different abilities to integrate information and information over time for the sake of the patient. And increasingly, machine learning is able to learn how humans, how clinicians think, and help them improve their decision making. So they are not conscious, but they are consciously helping the clinicians to make better decisions. And finally, we are also working in the center on using machine learning to enable better system pathways and processes in healthcare, especially enabling to deliver a multitude of analytics that are integrated in electronic health records and into the NHS system to better enable collaboration, interaction, and learning across the healthcare trusts. And finally, population health and public health policy, because as we saw in this pandemic, we can benefit from learning from one environment, from one country, from one particular location, and extrapolate this to other countries. For instance, how to deal with the pandemic, how to deal with the lockdown, and thereby enabling to identify better policies that can be used elsewhere.
Wow. So, I mean, there's a huge amount going on there, obviously. And what I'm really picking up there is a theme of predictive medicine, for instance. And this is a really good way of understanding what the machine learning is doing, because it can understand patterns. Say, for a given patient, and you have a whole raft of data, maybe from their wearables, from their medical records, from thousands or millions of other similar patients. All that can be synthesized together into an algorithm that learns as it goes along, I'm sure from huge patient sets, to help us predict what's likely to happen next with that patient and how they might respond to certain interventions. Could I summarize it like that?
Yes, that is true. So definitely machine learning is very useful in issuing forecasts and forecasts over time, so the predictions that you are mentioning, but it can do a lot more. It can also look at answering what-if questions. So for instance, if a patient was treated in a particular way, can we estimate counterfactuals? What would have happened if I would have treated the patient in a different way? What would have happened if I would have treated the patient earlier or later? So we can also explore alternative worlds using machine learning. We can understand not only predictions given current decisions that are made for the particular patient, but also explore the counterfactual worlds, these virtual worlds, alternative worlds, and understand what is the best course of treatment and action for a particular individual at a particular moment in time. So that goes beyond predictions. And finally, as you mentioned, recommender systems are also going beyond predictions because they take the human feedback into account. So we often would like to make predictions, but if for a particular clinician thinks, for instance, that this prediction is not accurate or would like to give feedback to the machine is able to then learn and identify better predictions for the future. So if you like, the human in the loop is there and is affecting this prediction and these predictions over time.
Okay, so there's the human factor there as well. So, Anne Phelan, what about you? We were hearing about benevolent AI and how you'll really be able to go right to the fundamentals, to the heart of human biology and indeed individual molecules in drugs and so on. And I suppose what I want to find out from you is how that approach allows you to do things that haven't been done before. How does this move things on?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's a lot of commonality actually across the panel around here. Human in the loop is an integrated part of the way we think about drug discovery. So really, through having built our knowledge graph, we can look at human biology. We have tools and capabilities to allow the scientists to visualize these knowledge graphs. I mean, they're unbelievably complicated, but we can zoom in and we can start to get a representation of what we think biology is. We can then query the tools for a given dysregulated mechanism or a particular disease classification, and we can start to think about what targets, what pathways we might want to modulate to correct those deficiencies or defects in the human body. The data are presented to us courtesy of the tools and the integrated tech capabilities that we've got. But the scientists are a key part of this. So the scientists look at the data, they review the data, they consider the options. We have a lot of technical capabilities that surface information to the scientists. So rather than us trying to read vast volumes of literature, the individual facts that we think are most pertinent are surfaced to the scientists to help them kind of join the dots of biology and kind of rise above the noise, so that we can really start to tailor our decision making to choose those right targets. And as you said earlier, we have capabilities to, once we've decided what target we want to work on, and you consider them as there's a three-dimensional element to protein. We want to find something that binds to that protein in a very, very exquisitely precise way. And so there's a shape element to that. There's a structural component. We have tools to help us to devise those compounds that ultimately make it through to the clinic. But at every stage, there is a human augmented element of this. There's an expertise. We similarly actually train our models to behave like drug discoveries. So we can present it with a lot of information. We make decisions on the back of that. That is then relearnt by the tools so that they can start to behave more and more as a drug discoverer would in the way they look at information, the way they deal and make decisions. So we have, because I'm a biologist and I think in kind of multi-parametric all the time, but machine learning scientists are very kind of A to B to C to D, and they're very, very good at breaking down any complex decision-making process into a series, almost like a decision tree of those subconscious decisions that you made that took you from A to Z, but they're very, very good at documenting those steps. And then they can program them and they can train the tools to behave like an experienced drug discovery, which is, again, it's all about quality, it's about speed. And ultimately, we want to generate tools for the clinical development that are safe. Paramount is safety, but also going to be efficacious. Attrition is an enormous problem in the pharmaceutical industry. The largest proportion of drugs that go into clinical trials, unfortunately, are not successful in meeting their endpoints in terms of efficacy. Sometimes it's safety. So everything we can do to learn from previous failures, previous successes, the knowledge, experience, and information that our drug discovery scientists and academic experts have, it's the kind of combination of all of those avenues that I think is going to transform the way we ultimately see success.
Yeah, and it's streamlining it all as well, isn't it? So it's speeding up the whole process. And as we've seen over the last year, medicine really has been moving along at warp speed. And I'm sure in the future we're going to see a lot of innovations because things are speeding up. This whole pipeline is becoming more efficient. But just before we go back to Junaid, can you perhaps just quickly put this into practice for us? It sounds great in principle, but what kind of successes have you had so far?
Yeah, so at Benevolent, we've used our own tools to define a number of targets that we currently have in drug discovery. So we have a portfolio of assets that we're taking through the drug discovery process, which culminates in some safety studies and then human clinical trials. So actually, we're just in the middle of an atopic dermatitis clinical trial now, on the back of some of the targets that were identified through using our tech. Another good example would be last year, actually. This is not a primary use of our knowledge graph, but last year, because we have this massive knowledge graph, we turned it over to COVID research to see if we could use the information that we had in the graph to try and identify an existing drug that we thought might have utility in preventing some of the more serious symptoms of COVID. So really quickly, the team got together, they queried our knowledge graph, particularly to look for existing drugs, because this is a crisis. We can't afford to make a drug. We needed to find something that already existed. And we were able to find the drug baricitinib. It's a drug that's owned by Eli Lilly, but it's now gone into, it's received emergency use authorization from the FDA and is now in clinical use for the treatment of late-stage COVID symptoms. So actually, by having built the infrastructure and having the knowledge graph, albeit not created for antiviral therapies at all, but we were able to pivot the graph to find something very, very timely, actually, for the current pandemic.
Yeah, and so just very quickly, so this wasn't that you had developed a new molecule, it was using this very powerful tool to go through existing catalogues.
Yeah, exactly right. So for ourselves, our main use is to discover new drugs that are going to be taken into the clinic. But this was a crisis, right? So this is a pandemic. We knew we had a really powerful knowledge graph, and we tried to use it to our, to the world's advantage, actually, to see if we could find something quick that would save lives.
Yeah, so we're back on pattern matching in a way.
Yes, exactly right.
Okay, lovely. So, Juno, what does this all look from the patient's point of view? Because you have a medical background yourself, and you're at Microsoft Research then, and we talk about augmenting doctors' superpowers, which I love. It's got almost like a real superhero aspect to it. So, what does that look like for the patient?
So maybe before I answer that, maybe just two other bits of context, which I think just might be helpful for us to consider. So one is over the next decade, depending on the paper that you read, the World Health Organization predicts that the world will have anywhere between 14 to 18 million less healthcare professionals on the planet versus what society is going to need for an aging population. When I'm in clinic and I practice as a GP, I have 10-minute appointments, 42 patients a day, and I still can't meet access demands. What's that going to look like 10 years from now? So if I then think about actually, what does this mean for patients? What does it mean for doctors? What does it mean for healthcare systems? Could we, through the better use of technology and the better use of AI, to Mahela's point earlier, empower patients? And could we begin to democratize information in ways that make sense to enable self-care in a way that we haven't even imagined before, leveraging the smartphones that we have today, but maybe the smartphones of tomorrow to be almost those widgets of activity that allow you to empower patients to have healthcare in different ways. If we do that right, could we, thinking about medicine being both an art and a science, the administrative burden that exists for doctors today, so documenting notes, then thinking about reimbursement claims in the US or in other countries, thinking about that clear documentation and coding, could AI automate some of those things, so allow and release time back to care for patients and allow clinicians to focus on that art of medicine and the art of science and that compassionate side and release time for compassion? If we can do that intelligently, leveraging global information, could we begin that journey towards precision medicine? And for me, precision medicine equals having had connected care plus having precision diagnostics and having precision therapeutics to enable me to do the practice of precision medicine. So for me, precision medicine isn't just thinking about the need for that individual and how to prescribe for that individual. It's a whole change in the practice. And if all of that can be done in a way that fits in with my workflow and makes my life easy, I can then focus on offering really good experiences to patients and the public that I serve. And it can also enable good experiences for me in the delivery of care. I think what we often forget is also the change management that is necessary for any technology, including AI, to be adapted into a workflow. But if this can be taken into consideration as we develop these systems, then there's a larger opportunity for adoption as well.
So you mentioned the treatment aspect as well there. So is it partly about being able to just have more of a conversation with the patient maybe about what treatments might be best for them? Is it partly that, and it can be a data-driven approach, so you can be much more confident in discussing certain outcomes with your patients? Would it look a bit like that?
So I think that's one thing. So in my, I mean, I can't remember the specific statistics, but medical knowledge is increasing every 3 days. everywhere in the world is publishing papers. If I'm thinking about a cancer treatment today, even if you think about recent breakthroughs in cancer therapy, so we used to have chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and surgery. A few years ago, we had the breakthrough of immuno-oncology. You don't just think about one immuno-oncology product, you now think about maybe the combination of immuno-oncology. For this individual in front of me, based on their demographics, their background, do I truly know what's the best treatment for them at that moment in time and how to adapt it? And can I base my treatment decisions on global real world evidence happening in real time and applying that back to that patient at that moment in time of care? So not just thinking about what I need to do based on the evidence base that I learned over the last 10 to 15 years, how can my evidence base for knowledge decision making be moment in time? And can that collective wisdom of the world help me better manage that individual in front of me?
So that's a huge combination of different AI and machine learning, I suppose, including natural language processing as well, then, which is a great technique for pouring through all the thousands of medical journals that come out and the medical papers that are written every day. A lot of that is going into the understanding, to use that term, maybe figuratively, but interpreting this huge barrage of literature that's coming out all the time.
Completely. And maybe building on something that Anne said, I wonder when we do a retrospective on what did the world do differently in the COVID pandemic versus otherwise, we'll begin to realize that many of these technologies were a key enabler for us to realize, better understand the disease and create vaccines, better understand the disease and have therapeutics, better understand population health and what's happening in different demographics across the world. Some of these technologies are already bringing fruit to bear. Just imagine what they could do in the future if they're more widely adopted and democratized.
And just before we fully look into the future, I do want to think a little bit about the ethics side of things here, because we are talking about huge amounts of data, patient data. We're talking about potential inequalities in access to the fruits of this kind of technology. So where does the ethical side come in for you, Junaid? Maybe briefly, if you can.
So I think ethics, equity, and responsibility are things I think about every day. And it's not just myself, but the organization I work for thinks about it, and the researchers I work with think about it as well. So when I think about ethics, are we really doing everything we can to limit a digital divide, but create a level of digital democracy in our decision making? When we think about the data sets upon which models are being built, are they truly heterogeneous, and are they truly representative of a population, or are they only representative of a subset of that population? And then they're on the responsibility. What are the both intended and unintended consequences of a algorithm or tool that we develop? All of these things, I think, are causing regulators to adapt how they think about the role of machine learning, how they think about the application of these tools in the real world. But a multidisciplinary approach through partnerships and understanding what the potential of technology could do in a responsible manner will allow us to fulfill that full potential, I believe, in the future.
Yeah, so Jim Weatherall, I know that ethics and data ethics are a big part of your consideration there. You actually have a kind of a data ethics plan, as it were, or a data ethics mission at AstraZeneca. And, we were hearing there about intended versus unintended consequences. So how does ethics play out for you in that R&D context in the pharmaceutical world?
So again, it's something we think about all the time, and as you referenced, people can go on our public website and see our 5 principles for ethical data and AI. So we thought it was really important to write that down, to share it with everyone, and to show that it's something that's kind of baked into our processes, if you like. And so you can think about it from a couple of aspects. There's data ethics, where I think it's important that data is treated in a sensitive and in a private fashion, and that people that have committed their data to be used in medical research, that it's used in accordance with their wishes and so on. So I think that's really important. Data is a great enabler, and we have to respect the people who have donated their data, if you will, to research and development. And then in terms of AI ethics, thinking about, I would be talking a lot today about how algorithms help us to make decisions, or maybe assist physicians in making decisions. We have to make sure that they're doing that in an equitable way, in a sort of fair way, in an unbiased way, wherever that is possible. And so I think it's really important to put checks and balances in place. There's some really nice tools you can use these days to check that your machine learning's not kind of veering off one way or the other, or preferring one group of people to another, but actually is trying to improve the outcome for everybody. So I think it's something you have to pay attention to with the data, with the technology, and how the algorithms are making decisions.
Okay, Mihaela, what about for you in the Cambridge Centre for AI in Medicine? And I'm thinking about inclusion in data and the long conversations that we can have about, if certain minority groups, for instance, are missing in the data that's been used to train these algorithms. That's a big problem, especially on the diagnostic side. So data ethics for you, just talk us through your own approach to this. It's a very important part of
Yes. Yes. So machine learning, as was said before, and AI only can really learn effectively when we have diverse and comprehensive data sets. So part of the research we are doing is how we can bring together data from multiple locations, possibly multiple countries. That's important for both diseases such as cancer, which are prevalent throughout the world, but even more importantly, for rare diseases. So we really are trying to learn how machine learning can help us compile and learn from a variety of data sets from different countries that may have different populations as well as different standards of care. We know that not only the populations are different across the globe, but the way in which medicine is practiced is different as well. So what is wonderful about some of the emerging tools in machine learning is that they enable us to learn from a variety of other experiences and populations. So we can transfer knowledge from one particular country to another. And again, imagine whether we can maybe adopt some of the policies or standards of care of technology that was used in one country, understand what effect it would have in another. So in this way, hopefully we can practice more effective medicine and more cost effective and also more targeted. But with respect to the differences and minorities, what is a minority in one particular country may be a majority in another. What may be a prevalent comorbidity in one country may not be a problem for the majority of the population, but a minority in another. So again, with machine learning, we are able to learn and synthesize information across these different countries and different domains and learn at scale. And this would not be easily possible with our own human brains because we need to consider all the shifts in the practice, the shifts in the features, and hence this is only possible with technology such as machine learning.
Okay, and what about you then? Because I know a lot of what you do is down at that very micro, even nano level, and yet ethics has to be baked into what you do, the data that you analyze, the predictions that you make for certain patient groups and so on. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, obviously we take ethics really seriously. We have a lot of efforts in terms of firewalling and protecting patient level data, making sure that it is all encrypted and anonymized. We recognize it to be highly sensitive data. It's enormously valuable for the sorts of work we're doing, but clearly it's privileged data, and so there's huge amounts of effort going into carefully handling and making sure that the specifics are never disclosed. So it's anonymized. We can then extract it, run our programs over it in a very safe and secure manner. But I think one of the comments just now really came home to me around understanding diversity, and something that might be a rare disease in one country may not be a rare disease in another country or another ethnic background, and this is something we're very aware of. And we have something called the Data Diversity Initiative, actually, and it's a group of people who are involved in actively sourcing data, patient-level data from other ethnicities, other backgrounds, rare diseases, and this kind of not readily accessible disease sources to make sure that we have some parity and some equality across diseases, across ethnic backgrounds in the research that we do.
Yeah, and that's so important, isn't it? So that we are aware of all kinds of great innovations that are cooked up in the labs amongst the bright minds of Cambridge, that it's not exclusionary for people in other parts of the world. We're going to wrap up quite soon, but I want to go through each of you, and let's come to you first on this, Anne, about the future. Where is this all going? So where do you want to see benevolent AI in 5 to 10 years' time? What delights are we going to see?
Yes, I think the most important element of everything we've discussed, there's two key themes. One is precision medicine. We're on the brink of a revolution in terms of genomics, people understanding their own genome, their own predisposition to disease, their likely response to treatments. We are absolutely on the brink of a revolution there. So that's something that Benevolent are trying to be a step ahead, think about what that's going to look like in terms of personalized medicine, but also finding drugs that are designed specifically for subsets of patient cohorts so that we're looking to maximize efficacy and minimize any potential side effects. This is something that the world is really expecting now. The other element, I think, in the next period is going to be about attrition. So there's some things we can do to speed up drug discovery, but once you're in clinical trial, if you need to dose someone for a year to see an improvement in their vital statistics or vital signs, you can't really speed that up. A 1 year clinical trial takes 1 year, but what we can do is improve the rate of success, reduce attrition, and make sure that a higher proportion of our drugs that go into clinical development actually are efficacious, safe, and make it through to a launch product.
But you do see a future where no target will be out of reach then?
Potentially. I don't think it's true to say no target. There's 20,000 or more genes in the human genome. Many of them are not good drug targets, but there are many of them that probably are, but are currently unexplored. And that's a space that we are really interested in, those novel targets where currently there's been no effort in utilizing those targets as potential therapeutics. That's a space we're really interested in.
So Junaid, what about you? A final few comments from you, the future of AI in medicine.
So I would say that AI will enable a future in medicine that allows medicine to be autonomous, anticipatory, predictive, and proactive, and interconnected.
Right. Well, that was nice and brief. So let's give you another comeback on that then. So just in terms of what would that, so you mentioned predictive, effective, all these exciting things. So I suppose for the patient, does it mean that we're going to live longer, that we'll live longer and healthier? Just what does that look in practice for all of us?
So I would hope that society can have longer, healthier lives, knowing that healthcare is something that they are empowered to better understand. And maybe health is almost a byproduct of other things. So it's not, the knowledge of healthcare is not just within domain experts such as doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and others, but actually they understand their own health in better ways, and they feel empowered to make their own decisions in the right way. For physicians and clinicians and nurses and pharmacists and all healthcare professionals operating at the top of their license, enabling them to spend time with those people that need care the most. So maybe those individuals with complex care needs. How do you navigate those individuals that have dementia, mental health issues, oncology issues, hypertension, diabetes, but actually at the same time ensure that they are being cared for in the best way possible, anticipate their needs before they even know them, and then target different forms of prevention, and thinking about that precision in the therapy to tailor the medicine to their needs at that moment in time.
So that's great. Mihaela, what about you then? Looking to a future of this predictive medicine, that sounds very exciting to me. And precision medicine, I know it's sometimes called, maybe incorrectly, personalized medicine. Some people know it that way, but precision medicine, that's where it's going for you, is it?
Yes, but as we were discussing, precision medicine, not only in terms of therapeutics, but also potentially better monitoring and screening. I'm really excited about the fact that maybe we are going to be able to understand progression to disease, like Junaid rightly said. So not only treating disease, but also preventing disease. We know, for instance, that many patients that are already diagnosed with cancer, they may be diagnosed late. So can we understand progression towards cancer and possibly prevent, or at a minimum, detect cancer early, at the earliest stages when it is treatable and curable? So all of that seems to be increasingly possible using machine learning technology. But I'm not only interested in this context on machine learning for healthcare and medicine, but also education. because I think that AI can transform really the education of clinicians, nurses, and healthcare personnel, but also patients. So it can enable us to take better care of ourselves, not just to take the exercise that we need to do or the medication that we may need to take to be able to live a better life. So I see enormous opportunities in AI, not only for healthcare and medicine, but also for education, both in healthcare, but also beyond that.
Okay, and in that education element, as you say. Finally, to you then, Jim Weatherall at AstraZeneca, what does it look like for you?
Yeah, I think it's tremendously exciting, and I could maybe think about the future of AI in medicine, both in the discovery of new medicines and then how they're best utilized and affect people's lives. I think in the discovery and development of new medicines, we've talked a bit about this, how we can find new, drug targets from knowledge graphs, as Anne talked about, and how we can use things like neural networks, modeled after our own human brains to kind of refine and speed up our definition of molecular structures that go into those drugs. So I see more and more of that happening. I would see that sort of accelerating and expanding and maybe becoming more of the norm over a period of time, possibly being accelerated by new developments like quantum computing or other things in time, depending how fast those other developments come online. And then in terms of the utilization of medicines, I think that the last year has shown us that if you can sort of harness data on a large scale and really understand the patterns in it and where it's going, you can have a more sort of real-time healthcare system. And I would love to see sort of AI play a role in real-time data analytics and healthcare feedback loops, so that, again, as some of the others have said, we can always find the right lifestyle choice and or the right medicine for this particular person at this particular time with their particular characteristics, using all the data available to us.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. It's been a fascinating session, but we're going to have to wrap it up there. So you just heard there from Jim Weatherall of AstraZeneca, and we've also heard today from Anne Phelan of Benevolent AI, Mihaela van der Schaar of the Cambridge Centre for AI in Medicine, and also Junaid Bajwa of Microsoft Research. Learned an awful lot there. So, folks, I'm Gareth Mitchell saying enjoy the rest of the Cambridge Festival, won't you? And thank you very much for joining this session. Bye-bye.